The quiet hum of an elegant restaurant fills the air. A young girl sits at a table, her wide eyes sparkling with birthday excitement. But in the shadows of this picture-perfect scene, something is terribly wrong. Her parents' voices falter, the warmth in their smiles fades, and the tension at their table grows unbearable. Across the room, a man watches silently. He knows this feeling too well, the weight of being judged before a word is spoken, the sting of being treated as if you don't belong. His name is Andre Sullivan, and tonight, he faces a decision that will not only change his life, but ripple through an entire community. What happens next shocks everyone. A confrontation erupts, words are exchanged, and the truth is laid bare in a way no one can ignore. But here's the twist. This moment is only the beginning. How did this quiet observer become the voice that shattered years of silence? What did he risk to fight for a family he barely knew? And why did a simple meal at a restaurant spark a battle for justice that no one saw coming? Stay with us as we unravel a story that dives deep into dignity, courage, and the unyielding fight for equality. Before we begin, have you ever witnessed something so wrong that you couldn't stay silent? Or maybe you felt what it's like to be judged unfairly. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And before we jump into Andre's unforgettable journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. This isn't just another story. It's a reminder of the power we all have to stand up for what's right. Now, let's step into the moment where everything changes. Andre Sullivan stepped off the old Greyhound bus and took a deep breath. The salty air of Charleston, South Carolina, filled his lungs, mixed with the faint aroma of freshly fried seafood from the market stalls nearby. It had been years since he last walked these streets. Much had changed, but somehow, everything still felt the same. The faded pastel houses with wrought iron balconies, the chatter of street vendors calling out their wares. It was all too familiar. Yet, beneath the surface, Andre could feel an unease he hadn't been able to shake since leaving the military. As he made his way to his mother's small duplex near the harbor, Andre passed groups of children playing tag on cracked sidewalks, and older men gathered around a domino table shaded by a leaning oak tree. Each nod of acknowledgement from the neighbors felt both warm and heavy. They knew his story, the decorated veteran returning home to a life that had moved on without him. "Andre!" his mother's voice greeted him before he even opened the front gate. Lucille Sullivan, a petite woman with hair streaked with gray, hurried down the steps with her arms wide open. Her embrace was firm, almost as if she was afraid he might disappear again. "It's so good to see you, baby," she said, her voice breaking. "It's good to be home, Ma," Andre replied, a soft smile easing across his face. Inside the modest home, the smell of cornbread and collard greens wafted through the air. Andre dropped his duffel bag by the door and joined his mother at the kitchen table. "Malcolm's at school," Lucille said as she poured him a glass of sweet tea. "That boy's working so hard, wants to make you proud." Andre smiled. "He doesn't have to work hard to do that." Lucille placed her hand over his. "How about you, Andre? You've been through so much. Are you ready to settle down now?" Andre nodded. "I've been ready for a while. I just need to find work, get things stable again, for you and Malcolm." Lucille's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes darting to the window. "Jobs aren't easy to come by around here, especially for people like us. But you've got determination, and that counts for something." Later that afternoon, Andre rolled up his sleeves and helped his mother fix her old Buick, which had been sputtering for weeks. Grease smeared across his hands as he tinkered under the hood. "Still got your magic touch," Lucille said, watching from the porch. "Not magic, just patience," Andre replied, chuckling softly. As he worked, his mind wandered to his time in the service. He had been part of a team that relied on precision and trust. Out here, it felt like no matter how precise or trustworthy he was, he'd always be at the mercy of someone else's judgment. The next morning, Andre stepped out into the street, dressed in his best button-up shirt and carrying a folder of resumes. The sun had just started to rise, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. On his way, he ran into Nathaniel Carter, a neighbor and longtime friend of the family. "Morning, Andre," Nathaniel called out, tipping his cap. He stood by the gate of his small yard, his young daughter Zara clutching his hand. "Morning, Nate. How've you been?" Nathaniel shrugged. Same old, trying to make ends meet, you know how it is." Andre nodded. Yeah, I do. Zara looked up at Andre with wide, curious eyes. Mr. Andre, are you going to work? Andre crouched to her level and smiled. I'm trying to, little lady. Got my fingers crossed. Nathaniel's expression grew somber as he watched Andre stand back up. You know, I tried applying at a few places last week. They didn't even look at my application, just said they weren't hiring. But when a guy behind me went up, white guy, they handed him an interview on the spot. Andre clenched his jaw. That's not right. No, it's not, Nathaniel replied. But that's how it is around here, always has been. Later that day, Andre overheard a conversation at the corner store about a high-end restaurant downtown called Riverside Pearl. Word was they were hiring. The name rang a bell. It was a place where Charleston's elite gathered for fine dining and business deals. Riverside Pearl? Andre asked the cashier. The woman behind the counter raised an eyebrow. Yeah, but I wouldn't waste my time if I were you. Folks like us don't last long in places like that. Andre straightened his posture, holding her gaze. I've handled worse. A restaurant doesn't scare me. With that, he made up his mind. He'd go down there, hand in his resume, and give it his best shot. If nothing else, he owed it to himself, and to Malcolm, to try. As he walked home, the weight of the decision settled on him. Charleston hadn't changed much. The cracks in the pavement and the whispers of injustice were still there, just as he remembered. But Andre wasn't the same man who had left this city years ago. He was stronger now, and if Charleston wanted to test him, he'd face it head on. Andre adjusted his tie as he stood outside Riverside Pearl, the most prestigious restaurant in Charleston. The white brick building with its grand arched windows overlooked the harbor, exuding an air of exclusivity. Andre glanced at the polished brass sign near the entrance, its engraved letters seeming to mock him. Fine dining. Exceptional standards. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of lavender and lemon polish. Everything gleamed, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and pristine white tablecloths adorned with silver candlesticks. Can I help you? A young hostess standing behind a mahogany podium greeted him with a polite but distant smile. I'm here to apply for a position, Andre said, holding up his folder of resumes. Her smile faltered ever so slightly as she nodded. Of course. Let me get the manager. Please, wait here. Andre's eyes scanned the dining room. Wealthy patrons in tailored suits and designer dresses chatted softly, their voices blending with the soothing hum of a jazz piano. The entire scene felt worlds away from the cracked sidewalks and weathered homes of his neighborhood. Moments later, a tall, impeccably dressed woman approached him. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her sharp features were accentuated by crimson lipstick. Margaret Hensley carried herself with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. You're here for the position? She asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes already assessing him. Yes, ma'am, Andre replied, extending his resume. She took the paper and glanced over it briefly, her lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. Follow me. Andre trailed her into a small office at the back of the restaurant. The walls were lined with certificates and awards, all showcasing Riverside Pearl's reputation as one of Charleston's finest establishments. Margaret sat behind a polished desk and gestured for Andre to take the seat opposite her. So, she began, folding her hands atop the desk, tell me why you think you'd be a good fit for Riverside Pearl. Andre leaned forward slightly, keeping his tone steady. I have a strong work ethic and a background in leadership from my time in the military. I'm used to working in high-pressure environments, and I take pride in doing things the right way. Margaret arched an eyebrow. Military experience is admirable, but it doesn't necessarily translate to fine dining. Have you ever worked in a restaurant like this before? No, but She cut him off with a raised hand. I see here you've worked as a mechanic and held some construction jobs. That's different from what we do here. Andre forced himself to remain calm. I may not have direct experience in fine dining, but I'm a quick learner and I know how to adapt to any situation. I'm confident I can meet your standards. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Our clientele expects a certain level of refinement, an understanding of subtlety, etiquette, and presentation. It's not just about hard work, it's about finesse. Do you think you can handle that? Andre met her gaze evenly. Yes, I do. For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then, she let out a small, condescending laugh. "You're very confident, Mr. Sullivan. But confidence isn't always enough. Here at Riverside Pearl, we have to be selective. We need people who fit the image of our brand. I'm sure you understand." Andre's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I believe everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves." Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming in. We'll be in touch if we decide to move forward." She rose from her chair, signaling the end of the interview. Back in the dining area, Andre passed by a young man polishing silverware. The man looked up and gave him a faint smile. "Hey," the young man said, setting the silverware aside. "You're applying for a job?" Andre nodded. "Yeah. Doesn't seem like I got it, though." The young man sighed and glanced toward the office. "I'm Caleb. Been working here for about a year. Margaret's tough. Honestly, I don't think she even read your resume." Andre frowned. "Why not?" Caleb hesitated, lowering his voice. "Let's just say, this place has a certain way of doing things. If you don't look the part, it doesn't matter how good you are." Andre's shoulders stiffened. "I guess I wasn't the part, huh?" Caleb looked uncomfortable, but didn't deny it. "I'm sorry. You seem like a good guy. If it were up to me..." "It's not." Andre finished for him. He forced a smile. "Thanks for the honesty." As Andre stepped back out into the sunlight, the sting of rejection settled deep in his chest. Margaret's words replayed in his mind. "We need people who fit the image." But he wasn't going to let her have the final say. He had fought through worse battles than this, and he wasn't about to let a gatekeeper like Margaret keep him from proving his worth. Standing at the edge of the street, Andre looked back at the restaurant's elegant facade. "I'll be back," he thought. "You're going to see what I'm made of." The familiar creak of the rusted gate welcomed Andre as he stepped into the small courtyard of his mother's home. It was late afternoon, and the neighborhood buzzed with the sounds of daily life. Children's laughter, the hum of a distant radio, and the rhythmic clinking of a makeshift basketball hoop. Andre wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against the porch railing, taking in the scene around him. The scent of freshly grilled hot dogs drifted from a nearby house, mingling with the salty air from the harbor. Despite its wear and tear, this corner of Charleston felt alive. "Hey, Mr. Sullivan," a cheerful voice called out. Andre turned to see Zara Carter, the 9-year-old daughter of his neighbor Nathaniel. She was perched on the steps of her house, clutching a sketch pad. Her braided hair glistened in the sunlight as she waved enthusiastically. "Hey there, Zara," Andre said, crossing the street to greet her. "What are you working on?" Zara held up her sketch pad, revealing a colorful drawing of a garden with butterflies and flowers. "It's for art class," she explained proudly. "Miss Sanders said I have real talent." Andre crouched to her level, examining the drawing. "You do, kid. This is great work. You ever think about becoming an artist?" Her smile dimmed slightly. "I'd like to, but I don't know. People say stuff." Andre raised an eyebrow. "What kind of stuff?" Before Zara could answer, Nathaniel appeared on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Andre, you got a minute?" The two men settled on a couple of plastic chairs in Nathaniel's yard, while Zara continued drawing on the steps. "She's something, isn't she?" Nathaniel said, nodding toward his daughter. Andre smiled. "She's got talent for sure. What's this about people saying things?" Nathaniel let out a heavy sigh, leaning back in his chair. "Kids at school give her a hard time. Say things like, 'You're not good enough,' or 'Art's not for people like us.' Stuff they probably hear at home." Andre frowned. "What do the teachers do about it?" Nathaniel shrugged. "Not much. Zara keeps her head up, though. She's tougher than she looks. But man, it gets to me sometimes. I want better for her, you know?" Andre nodded slowly, the weight of Nathaniel's words settling on him. He understood the struggle all too well, the fight to protect dreams in a world determined to crush them. "It's not just the kids," Nathaniel continued. "Jobs, housing, even just walking down the street. Feels like we're always fighting to prove we belong." Andre leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're not wrong. I see it everywhere. But giving up's not an option. For Zara's sake, we've got to keep pushing." Nathaniel offered a small, weary smile. "You always did have that stubborn streak." Andre chuckled. "Must have got it from my mom." Later that evening, Andre joined a group of kids playing basketball in an empty lot down the street. The makeshift court was nothing more than a cracked asphalt square with a hoop nailed to a wooden pole, but the energy was electric. "Come on, Mr. Andre, show us what you got," one of the boys shouted, tossing him the ball. Andre caught it with ease, a grin spreading across his face. "Y'all sure you're ready for this?" The kids laughed and jeered, forming a loose defense as Andre dribbled down the court. He moved with surprising agility, weaving past them and sinking a clean shot. The group erupted in cheers and groans. "Man, you're good," a boy named Jamal exclaimed. Andre laughed, handing him the ball. "I've had some practice. Your turn. Let's see what you've got." The game continued until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The kids gathered around Andre afterward, chattering excitedly. "Mr. Andre," Jamal said, his voice quieter now, "do you think I can grow up to be anything I want? Like, really?" Andre paused, looking at the boy's earnest face. He glanced around at the other kids, all waiting for his answer. "Of course you can," Andre said firmly. "But it's not going to be easy. You'll have to work harder than most people. And some folks might tell you it's not possible. But you don't listen to them. You listen to what's in here." He tapped his chest. "But," Jamal hesitated, "isn't it easier if you're, not like us?" Andre's heart clenched. He crouched down to meet Jamal's gaze. "Let me tell you something. The world's going to throw all kinds of obstacles in your way. But it's not about where you start. It's about where you're going. You've got the power to change things, Jamal. Don't let anyone take that away from you." As the kids dispersed, Andre sat on the edge of the lot, watching the first stars appear in the night sky. His conversation with Jamal lingered in his mind, intertwining with the struggles Zara faced at school and Nathaniel's quiet frustration. Andre realized that finding a job wasn't just about supporting his family anymore. It was about setting an example for these kids, showing them that they could rise above the barriers placed in their way. He clenched his fists, a newfound determination surging through him. He wouldn't let Charleston's invisible walls hold him back. Not for himself, and certainly not for the next generation. The glow of Riverside Pearl shimmered under the Charleston moonlight, its pristine windows reflecting the flickering lights of the harbor. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet sophistication. The clinking of crystal glasses and murmurs of genteel conversation painted a picture of exclusivity. Riverside Pearl was hosting one of its grand soirees, a celebration of wealth and status that had become a hallmark of Charleston's elite. At a corner table near the back of the dining room, Nathaniel Carter sat with his family, smiling warmly at Zara as she adjusted the delicate paper crown atop her head. It was her birthday, and Nathaniel had saved for months to give his daughter a night she would remember. "Do you like it, baby girl?" he asked softly, his voice thick with affection. Zara beamed. "It's so fancy, Daddy. Look at all the candles." Felicia, Nathaniel's wife, reached over to hold her husband's hand. "This was a good idea," she said. "She deserves to feel special." But their moment of joy was cut short as a waitress approached. Diane Rivers, an older woman with a permanent scowl etched across her face, looked down at the Carters with poorly veiled disdain. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly, her tone devoid of warmth. Nathaniel glanced up with a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. We'd like to order, please." Diane raised an eyebrow as she pulled out her notepad. "You sure? This menu isn't inexpensive." Nathaniel stiffened but kept his composure. "We're aware. We'll start with the house salad for my wife and me, and Zara will have the chicken tenders from the kids' menu." Diane scribbled on her notepad with exaggerated movements. "I'll have to check if we even have that. This isn't a fast food place, you know." Felicia's eyes narrowed. "We're aware of where we are, thank you." Diane's lips twitched into a smirk as she turned away, muttering just loud enough for them to hear, "Don't know why some people bother coming here." Nathaniel's face darkened, but he reached for Felicia's hand under the table, silently asking her to let it go. Zara looked back and forth between her parents, her earlier excitement dimmed. Meanwhile, Andre was stepping into the opulent foyer of Riverside Pearl. Dressed in a clean white shirt and neatly pressed slacks, he clutched the resume folder he'd brought for Caleb. His visit wasn't for an interview, but to thank Caleb for his kindness during their last encounter. As he scanned the room, his gaze landed on a familiar face, Nathaniel. Andre's brow furrowed as he noticed Diane returning to their table with a dismissive expression. Nathaniel's stiff posture and Felicia's tight-lipped smile told Andre all he needed to know. "Not tonight," he muttered to himself, moving toward their table. When he arrived, Zara's face lit up. "Mr. Andre! Hey there, birthday girl!" Andre crouched to her level, his warm smile easing some of the tension at the table. Nathaniel extended a hand. "Andre, what brings you here?" "Just passing through," Andre lied. He didn't want to embarrass his friend by admitting he wasn't there as a customer. "But it looks like I showed up just in time. How's everything going?" Felicia hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Diane, who was hovering nearby with an irritated expression. "It's fine." "Is it?" Andre asked, his voice low but firm. He straightened up and turned to Diane, who crossed her arms defensively. "Can I help you?" she snapped. Andre's voice was calm but carried an edge. "You can start by showing some respect. This family deserves the same service as anyone else in here." Diane scoffed, glancing toward the kitchen. "I don't have time for this." "Make time," Andre countered, stepping closer. "Unless you think your job doesn't include treating customers with dignity." The commotion attracted the attention of Margaret Hensley, who emerged from the back office with her trademark look of irritation. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached. "What's going on here?" Margaret demanded, her icy gaze sweeping over the scene. Diane spoke up first. "This man is causing a disruption, Margaret. I was just doing my job." Margaret turned to Andre, her expression hardening as recognition dawned. "Mr. Sullivan, back again, I see." Andre met her gaze without flinching. "I'm here to visit a friend, but I can't stand by while your staff mistreats people." Margaret's smile was tight and condescending. "I don't appreciate accusations against my employees. Diane is one of our best, and I trust her judgment implicitly." Nathaniel rose from his seat, his voice calm but resolute. "All we wanted was to celebrate my daughter's birthday. Instead, we've been made to feel like we don't belong." Margaret's eyes flicked to Nathaniel, then back to Andre. "This establishment has standards, Mr. Carter. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable somewhere. Casual." Andre's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Your standards are a joke if they let this kind of behavior slide. You're not running a restaurant. You're running a club for people who think they're better than everyone else." The dining room fell silent as the heated exchange drew the attention of other patrons. Among them was a distinguished-looking man seated near the center of the room. He discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording the scene. Margaret's voice dropped, cold and clipped. "Mr. Sullivan, I think it's time for you to leave. You're not a customer, and you're disrupting our service." Andre took a step closer, his voice steady but loaded with conviction. "You're right, I'm not a customer. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe if more people like me were allowed to work here, you wouldn't have to deal with disruptions like this." Margaret's face flushed with anger as she signaled to the security guard stationed near the entrance. "Escort him out." The guard approached, his expression apologetic, as he gestured for Andre to follow him. "Let's go, sir. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Andre hesitated, his eyes locking with Nathaniel's. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Nathaniel shook his head. "Don't be. You stood up for us. That means something." As Andre was led out, the room buzzed with whispers. Zara clung to her father's arm, her earlier joy replaced by confusion and sadness. But in the corner of the dining room, the man with the phone put it back in his pocket, a thoughtful expression on his face. Andre stepped into the cool night air, his jaw tight and his mind racing. The words Margaret had thrown at Nathaniel's family echoed in his head. Each step away from Riverside Pearl felt heavier, like a retreat in a battle he hadn't meant to fight but couldn't ignore. The sound of approaching footsteps broke his thoughts. He turned to see Caleb Tucker jogging toward him, his server uniform slightly rumpled. "Andre," Caleb called, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching. "I saw what happened. That wasn't right." Andre shook his head, letting out a sharp breath. "No, it wasn't. But it's not the first time, and it won't be the last." Caleb looked down, guilt evident on his face. She runs this place like it's her own little kingdom. If you don't fit into her idea of what's acceptable, you're out. No questions asked." Andre crossed his arms, his voice firm. "And you just let her get away with it?" Caleb hesitated. "It's not that simple. I need this job. Most of us here do. But that doesn't mean I agree with her. Their conversation was interrupted by the creak of the restaurant's front door. Both men turned to see Nathaniel and his family stepping out, their expressions a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Andre moved toward them immediately. Nate, Felicia, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Zara, I'm sorry your birthday turned out like this. Zara gave him a small, brave smile. It's okay, Mr. Andre. I still had fun seeing you. Nathaniel placed a protective hand on her shoulder. You didn't have to stand up for us, Andre, but you did. That means a lot. Before Andre could respond, a new voice cut through the quiet. Excuse me. Everyone turned to see the distinguished man from the restaurant standing a few feet away. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair and a tailored navy suit that spoke of old money. His piercing eyes scanned the group with interest. I couldn't help but overhear what happened inside, the man said, his voice calm but authoritative. And I saw enough to know that you've been treated unfairly. Nathaniel tensed. Who are you? The man offered a small, polite smile. My name is Edward Hastings. I'm a business associate of the Prescott family, the owners of Riverside Pearl. Andre frowned. And why are you talking to us? Edward held up his phone. Because I recorded the entire exchange. Margaret Hensley may think she's untouchable, but the Prescotts care deeply about their reputation. This isn't the kind of publicity they'd want. Felicia narrowed her eyes, her voice tinged with suspicion. And what do you want out of this? Edward tucked his phone back into his pocket. I want to see this establishment held accountable. I've had my doubts about Margaret for a while now, but tonight confirmed them. If you're willing, I'd like to help you make sure she doesn't continue running this place like her personal fiefdom. The group exchanged uncertain glances before Andre spoke. What are you suggesting? Edward stepped closer, his tone measured. I can share this video with the Prescotts and ensure they're aware of what happened tonight. But if you're serious about standing up to her, you'll need more than just this recording. You'll need testimony, people willing to come forward and speak the truth. Nathaniel's brow furrowed. People like who? Edward gestured toward Caleb, who shifted nervously under the sudden attention. People like him, employees who've seen her behavior firsthand. Caleb looked panicked. Whoa, hold on. I don't know if I can do that. If she finds out, I'll lose my job for sure. Edward's expression softened. I understand your fear, but staying silent only lets her continue. If enough of you come forward, the Prescotts will have no choice but to act. Andre placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. It's your decision, Caleb. But think about what's right. Not just for you, but for everyone who comes through those doors. That night, back in his modest home, Andre sat at the kitchen table, his thoughts racing. His mother, Lucille, placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across from him, her eyes filled with quiet concern. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, she said gently. Andre sighed. I saw something tonight, Ma. Something I couldn't just walk away from. And now, I don't know what's next. Lucille reached across the table, resting her hand over his. You've always been the kind of man who stands up for what's right. That's not a burden. It's a gift. Whatever you decide to do, trust yourself. Andre nodded slowly, her words settling in his heart like an anchor. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. Margaret Hensley's reign at Riverside Pearl was about to face its biggest challenge. The morning sunlight streamed through Andre's kitchen window as he poured himself a cup of coffee. The events at Riverside Pearl lingered heavily in his mind, his fists clenched at the memory of Margaret's condescending tone, the humiliation etched on Nathaniel's face, and Zara's confused, disappointed eyes. A sharp knock on the door pulled Andre out of his thoughts. Setting his mug down, he walked to the door and opened it to find Caleb Tucker standing on the porch, looking uneasy. Caleb? Andre said, surprised. Hey, Caleb muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Can I come in? Andre stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. What's going on? Caleb hesitated, his eyes darting around the modest room as if searching for the right words. I've been thinking about what happened last night, about what you said. Andre folded his arms, his voice calm but firm. And, Caleb sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table. You were right, Margaret. The way she runs that place, it's not just unfair, it's toxic. But standing up to her, it's not as easy as you think. She's fired people before for less. Andre pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Tell me what you know. Caleb glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. There was a guy who worked there before me, Anthony, hardworking guy, did everything by the book. But one day he called Margaret out for yelling at one of the bussers in front of a full dining room. Said it was unprofessional. What happened to him? Andre asked, leaning forward. Caleb's expression darkened. She wrote him up for insubordination. A week later, she found some excuse to fire him. Said he wasn't meeting standards. Andre shook his head, anger simmering just beneath the surface. So, she punishes anyone who speaks out. Caleb nodded. Exactly. That's why most of us just keep our heads down. But after last night, I don't know, man. Watching what she did to Nathaniel's family, hearing the way she talked to you, it's too much. Something's gotta change. Before Andre could respond, another knock echoed through the house. He opened the door to find Diane Rivers standing there, her expression a mix of determination and hesitation. Diane, Andre said, his tone cautious. Can I come in? She asked, glancing past him to see Caleb already seated at the table. Andre stepped aside, and Diane entered, clutching her purse tightly. She looked at Caleb, her eyes narrowing slightly. So, you're here too? Caleb nodded, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. Looks like we're on the same page for once. Diane turned to Andre. I heard about what happened last night. Word travels fast in a place like Riverside Pearl. And, Andre prompted, crossing his arms. Diane took a deep breath, her grip on her purse tightening. I've worked there for 15 years. I've seen more than my fair share of Margaret's behavior. But last night crossed a line. She's gotten away with too much for too long. Andre raised an eyebrow. And now you want to do something about it? Diane's gaze hardened. I do. But let's be clear. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because Margaret's behavior doesn't just hurt the customers. It's hurting us, the staff. I've kept my head down for years because I need this job, but maybe it's time to stop. The three of them sat at the table, the atmosphere charged with both tension and resolve. So, what's the plan? Caleb asked, looking to Andre. Andre tapped his fingers on the table, his mind racing. I have someone I can call, a lawyer. His name's Thomas Bellamy. He's handled cases like this before. If we're going to take Margaret down, we'll need to do it the right way, with evidence and witnesses. Diane frowned. You think the Prescotts will actually listen? Margaret's been there for years. She's practically untouchable. Andre's jaw tightened. No one's untouchable when the truth comes out. But it's going to take all of us working together. You both need to be ready to speak up, even if it means risking your jobs. Caleb swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. I'll do it. I can't keep standing by while she treats people like garbage. Diane hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. I'll think about it. I need to know this won't be for nothing. Andre met her gaze, his voice steady. It won't be. I promise you that. Later that day, Andre made the call to Thomas Bellamy. The lawyer's deep, measured voice came through the line. Andre Sullivan, Thomas said, his tone tinged with curiosity. It's been a while. What can I do for you? Andre explained everything, Margaret's behavior, the incident with Nathaniel's family, and the growing frustration among the staff. Thomas listened quietly before responding. It sounds like you've got a solid case, but you'll need more than just anecdotes. Do you have evidence? Witnesses? I'm working on it, Andre said. Caleb and Diane are willing to come forward, and there's a recording of last night's incident. Thomas hummed thoughtfully. That's a good start. If you can get more staff members to speak out and document any patterns of discrimination, we'll have a strong foundation. But I'll warn you, cases like this aren't easy. Margaret's going to fight back, and she'll play dirty if she has to. Andre's grip on the phone tightened. I'm not afraid of a fight. Thomas chuckled. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Let's meet tomorrow and start planning. As Andre hung up, a flicker of hope stirred within him. For the first time since stepping into Riverside Pearl, he felt like he wasn't standing alone. Caleb's courage, Diane's experience, and Thomas's expertise gave him a glimmer of possibility. This wasn't just about Margaret anymore. It was about justice, for Nathaniel's family, for the staff, and for everyone who had been made to feel less than they deserved. The next day, Andre arrived at Thomas Bellamy's downtown Charleston office. The building was modest compared to the grandeur of Riverside Pearl, but its walls exuded a sense of purpose. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile and directed him to Thomas's office. "Come on in," Thomas said, rising from his desk to shake Andre's hand. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a crisp navy suit that spoke of quiet professionalism. "It's good to see you again, Andre. Let's get to work." Andre wasted no time recounting the events at Riverside Pearl. Thomas listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "You've got a strong starting point," Thomas said when Andre finished. "The recording from Mr. Hastings is a gold mine. It's hard to argue against a video. But we'll need more than that. Margaret's defense will be to frame this as an isolated incident. We have to prove it's part of a larger pattern." Andre nodded. "That's why I brought Caleb and Diane into this. They've both agreed to testify." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Diane Rivers? She's been at Riverside Pearl for years, hasn't she?" 15 years, Andre confirmed. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. That kind of tenure makes her testimony invaluable. If she's willing to stand up, it could shift the entire case, but it also puts her at great risk. Margaret won't hesitate to retaliate. Andre's jaw tightened. "I'll make sure Diane knows what she's up against. She's strong, but this isn't easy for anyone." Later that evening, Andre gathered Caleb and Diane at his house to discuss the plan. The small living room felt cramped with the three of them sitting around a coffee table piled with documents and notebooks. Thomas joined via video call, his voice filling the room with authority. "Here's what we'll do. Caleb, Diane, your role will be critical. We need you to document everything. Every instance of Margaret's discriminatory behavior, every unreasonable demand, and every time she's crossed the line. Specific examples will build our case." Diane crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "And what happens when she finds out? Because she will? Margaret's not stupid." Thomas's tone softened. "That's why it's important we act quickly. Once we file the formal complaint with the Prescotts, Margaret's power will be limited. But until then, you'll need to be careful." Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So, what do we do if she starts retaliating before that?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Document that too. Every threat, every unfair action. Write it down. Retaliation strengthens our case." Andre looked between the two of them. "You're not alone in this. I'll be there every step of the way." Over the next week, Caleb and Diane began collecting evidence. Caleb took notes on Margaret's unfair scheduling practices, where she consistently gave the most grueling shifts to employees she didn't favor. Diane kept a record of her demeaning comments and the way she treated customers differently based on their appearance. It wasn't long before Margaret started noticing. "Diane," Margaret called one afternoon as Diane was clearing a table. "A word." Diane followed Margaret to the back office, her stomach twisting with unease. "I've been hearing things," Margaret began, her voice low and threatening. "Certain people seem to think they can undermine me." Diane forced herself to remain calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Let me make myself clear. This is my restaurant. Anyone who thinks they can challenge me will find themselves out of a job faster than they can blink." Diane returned to the dining room, her hands shaking. Caleb noticed her distress and whispered, "You okay?" She nodded stiffly. "It's nothing I haven't dealt with before, but she knows something's up." Meanwhile, Thomas worked on drafting the formal complaint. He met with Edward Hastings to review the recording from the night of the incident, ensuring it was clear and irrefutable. "This will be the keystone of our case," Thomas told Andre during one of their strategy meetings. "But we'll still need to corroborate it with testimony and documentation. The Prescotts won't act on one video alone. They'll need overwhelming evidence." Andre's phone buzzed as they spoke. It was a text from Caleb. "Margaret just called a staff meeting tomorrow. I think she's onto us." The next day, Caleb and Diane attended the staff meeting with nerves running high. Margaret stood at the front of the room, her posture rigid and her tone clipped. "As you all know, Riverside Pearl is a place of excellence," she began. "But recently I've noticed some employees seem distracted. Let me remind you that your loyalty is to this restaurant and to me. Anyone who forgets that will face the consequences." Her words hung heavy in the air as the staff exchanged uneasy glances. After the meeting, Caleb whispered to Diane, "She's trying to scare us." "Well, it's working," Diane muttered, though her resolve hadn't faltered. That evening, Andre hosted another meeting at his house with Caleb, Diane, and Thomas. The tension in the room was palpable as they discussed Margaret's latest move. "She's trying to intimidate us," Andre said, "but we can't back down now. She's scared, which means we're making progress." Thomas nodded. "This is exactly why documentation is so important. Every veiled threat she makes is another point in our favor." Diane let out a heavy sigh. "I knew this wouldn't be easy, but it's exhausting." Andre placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not in this alone. We're in it together." For the first time in days, Diane smiled faintly. "Thanks, Andre. I needed that." As the group disbanded for the night, Andre stood on the porch, watching Caleb and Diane walk down the street. The glow of a distant street lamp cast long shadows across the pavement. He turned back to Thomas, who lingered at the doorway. "This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" Andre asked. Thomas's expression was grave but determined. "Probably. But if you keep pushing, it will get better. And when it does, it'll be worth it." Andre nodded, the weight of the battle ahead settling on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone Margaret had ever silenced. Andre sat across from Thomas in the lawyer's office, tension humming in the air. On the desk between them were the compiled records: Caleb's notes on Margaret's discriminatory scheduling, Diane's detailed accounts of Margaret's demeaning comments, and Edward Hastings's video of the night at Riverside Pearl. "It's a good start," Thomas said, flipping through the documents, "but we need more. If we want this to stick, we have to show a pattern that the Prescotts can't ignore. That means more witnesses and, ideally, something concrete that comes straight from Margaret." Andre leaned forward, his jaw set. "I'll get it, whatever it takes." That evening, Caleb texted Andre. "Margaret called another meeting. I'll try to record this time." Andre replied quickly, "Be careful. Don't get caught." The following day, Caleb arrived at the staff meeting armed with a small voice recorder hidden in his pocket. Margaret stood at the front of the room, her gaze sharp and unforgiving as she surveyed the employees. "Let me make something clear," Margaret began, her tone cold. "I've heard rumors about certain people trying to undermine this establishment. Let me remind you all that your jobs are a privilege, not a right. Anyone caught spreading lies or causing trouble will be dealt with swiftly." Caleb kept his head down, his heart pounding as he subtly adjusted the recorder. Margaret's voice grew sharper. "And for those of you who think you can challenge me, think again. This is my restaurant, and no one dictates how I run it." Caleb glanced around the room, noting the uneasy expressions of his co-workers. He caught Diane's eye briefly, and her tight nod reassured him that they were in this together. After the meeting, Caleb slipped out of the building and called Andre. "I got it," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and triumph. She practically admitted to everything. That night, Caleb and Andre met with Thomas to review the recording. As Margaret's voice played through the small speaker, Thomas's expression hardened. "This is exactly what we needed," Thomas said. "She's arrogant enough to incriminate herself. This will make a powerful addition to our case." Andre felt a flicker of hope. "So, what's the next step?" Thomas leaned back in his chair. "We filed a formal complaint with the Prescotts. With this recording, the video from Edward, and the staff testimonies will force their hand. But be prepared, Margaret won't go down quietly." 2 days later, as Andre and Caleb continued gathering additional evidence, Margaret launched her counterattack. Andre was at home when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane. "Margaret's accusing you of stealing documents from the office. She's reporting it to the Prescotts." Andre stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. He immediately called Thomas. "She's trying to flip this on me," Andre said, pacing the room. Thomas's voice was calm but firm. "This is a classic move. Discredit the accuser to shift the narrative. But if she's fabricating evidence, it'll backfire. Do not engage with her directly. Let me handle it." True to her word, Margaret reported Andre to the Prescott family, claiming he had stolen sensitive documents from the restaurant. Andre received an email from the Prescott's legal team requesting a meeting to address the accusation. Thomas accompanied Andre to the meeting, held in a sleek corporate office overlooking Charleston Harbor. Margaret was there, her expression smug as she sat across the table from them. "I trust you understand the seriousness of this matter," one of the Prescott lawyers began, addressing Andre. Andre started to speak, but Thomas cut in smoothly. My client understands the importance of truth and transparency, which is why we're here to clear his name. I'd like to see the evidence supporting this accusation." Margaret opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a typed statement accusing Andre of accessing confidential files without permission. Thomas scanned the document before raising an eyebrow. "This is a statement, not evidence. Do you have anything more substantial?" Margaret's confidence faltered slightly. I know he did it. I don't need a camera to see what's obvious." Thomas leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Baseless accusations won't hold up, Ms. Hensley. In contrast, we have substantial evidence of your misconduct, including a recording of you admitting to discriminatory practices. Would you like to hear it?" Margaret's face paled as Thomas produced the recording device and played a snippet of her speech from the staff meeting. "This is my restaurant, and no one dictates how I run it," Margaret's voice echoed in the room. The Prescott's legal team exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. After the meeting, Andre and Thomas stepped outside, the tension in the air finally lifting. "She's on thin ice now," Thomas said. "The Prescotts will have no choice but to investigate, and when they do, they'll find everything we've uncovered." Andre nodded, determination burning in his chest. "This isn't just about taking her down. It's about making things right. For Nathaniel's family, for the staff, for everyone she's mistreated." Thomas placed a hand on Andre's shoulder. "And that's exactly why we're going to win." Riverside Pearl was unusually quiet on the morning of the meeting. The dining room, typically bustling with staff preparing for the day's service, had been rearranged into a formal conference setting. A long table dominated the space, flanked by rows of chairs. The tension in the air was palpable as employees whispered among themselves, their gazes darting toward the front door. Margaret Hensley sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid and her expression unreadable. Despite the storm brewing around her, she radiated the same imperious authority that had kept her in power for years. Andre arrived with Thomas Bellamy by his side, their presence drawing the attention of the staff. Caleb and Diane followed closely, their expressions a mix of nervousness and resolve. Finally, the heavy glass doors opened and William Prescott stepped inside. His tailored suit and confident stride exuded authority, but his sharp eyes betrayed a hint of displeasure. He was a man used to running a tight ship, and the recent turmoil at Riverside Pearl had clearly disrupted his otherwise pristine record. William took his seat at the head of the table, directly across from Margaret. He scanned the room, his gaze settling briefly on Andre before turning to Margaret. "Thank you all for being here," William began, his voice calm but commanding. "I've received several complaints regarding the management and culture at Riverside Pearl. These allegations are serious, and as the head of this company, I am here to address them personally." Margaret offered a tight smile. "Mr. Prescott, I assure you, these complaints are baseless. The individuals involved are attempting to undermine the integrity of this establishment." William raised a hand, silencing her. "We'll get to that. For now, I'd like to hear directly from those who brought these concerns forward." He turned to Andre. "Mr. Sullivan, you've been at the center of these allegations. Please present your case." Andre stood, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'm here today because I witnessed and experienced firsthand the culture of discrimination and hostility under Margaret Hensley's leadership. But this isn't just about me. It's about the staff, the customers, and the principles this company claims to uphold." He gestured toward Thomas, who set up a laptop connected to a projector. The screen came to life with Edward Hastings' recording of the incident involving Nathaniel Carter's family. The room fell silent as Margaret's dismissive comments played, her condescension and bias laid bare. William's expression darkened as the recording ended. "Is this how customers are treated at Riverside Pearl, Margaret?" Margaret's composure faltered. "That incident was taken out of context. The family was disruptive." Andre cut in, his voice firm. "They were celebrating a birthday. The only disruption was the way they were treated." Next, Caleb stood to present the audio recording from the staff meeting. As Margaret's voice filled the room again, her words dripping with arrogance and disdain, the weight of her actions became undeniable. "This is my restaurant, and no one dictates how I run it." The statement hung in the air like a dagger. Margaret's face flushed as whispers spread among the staff. William leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Margaret. "Is there any context that justifies this, Margaret?" Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Diane stood next, her hands trembling slightly as she held a piece of paper. "I've worked here for 15 years, she began, her voice shaky but growing stronger. "I've seen so many good employees driven out because they couldn't stand the way Margaret treated them. She's humiliated us, overworked us, and made us feel like we're nothing. We've stayed silent because we were scared, but enough is enough." Andre stepped forward again. "This isn't just about Margaret's behavior. It's about the culture she's fostered. If Riverside Pearl wants to live up to its reputation, it needs to start with accountability and change." William sat back, his expression unreadable as he absorbed everything. Finally, he turned to Margaret. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Margaret's voice wavered for the first time. "These people are trying to ruin me. I've run this restaurant successfully for years." "Success built on fear and exclusion is not success," William interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. He stood, straightening his suit. "Margaret Hensley, effective immediately, your employment with this company is terminated." Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret's eyes widened in shock, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Mr. Prescott, please." William raised a hand. "This is not up for debate. Your actions have violated the core values of this company, and I will not tolerate it." Turning to the staff, William's tone softened. "To the rest of you, I want to apologize for allowing this culture to persist for so long. Effective today, we will begin a full review of Riverside Pearl's operations and implement measures to ensure fairness, respect, and accountability. If you have concerns, my team will be here to listen." The room erupted into applause as William walked toward Andre. "Mr. Sullivan," William said, extending his hand, "thank you for bringing this to my attention. Your courage has made a difference." Andre shook his hand firmly. "This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who deserves better." As the meeting adjourned, Andre stood outside Riverside Pearl, the sunlight warming his face. Caleb and Diane joined him, their smiles reflecting a mix of relief and hope. "It's not over yet," Andre said, "but it's a start." "And it's because of you," Diane replied. "No," Andre said, his gaze steady. "It's because we stood together." The aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces filled the air as Andre stepped into Riverside Pearl for his first day as interim manager. The once intimidating grandeur of the restaurant now carried a sense of possibility. Andre adjusted his tie in the mirrored wall, taking a deep breath before heading into the dining area. Staff members greeted him with a mix of curiosity and respect. Caleb and Diane, now visibly more relaxed, approached him with warm smiles. "You ready for this?" Caleb asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. Andre chuckled. "Ready as I'll ever be. Let's show them what this place can really be." Andre's first order of business was organizing a community event, a gesture to repair Riverside Pearl's reputation and welcome everyone, regardless of their background. He worked closely with the staff, creating a menu that balanced the restaurant's upscale appeal with approachable dishes for families. Invitations went out to local community leaders, regular patrons, and even those who had once been turned away or mistreated under Margaret's reign. Among the invited guests were Nathaniel Carter and his family. "You don't have to do this, Andre," Nathaniel said when he received the invitation. "Yes, I do," Andre replied firmly. "This is about making things right." The night of the event arrived, and Riverside Pearl buzzed with activity. Tables were adorned with simple but elegant centerpieces, and the soft glow of string lights cast a welcoming ambiance. The dining room, once an exclusive domain of Charleston's elite, was now filled with a vibrant mix of guests from all walks of life. Andre moved through the room with a calm authority, greeting guests and ensuring everything ran smoothly. He paused when he saw Zara Carter, wearing a bright pink dress and her trademark wide smile. "Hey, birthday girl," Andre said, crouching to her level. "Hi, Mr. Andre," Zara beamed. "This place looks so pretty." "It does, doesn't it?" Andre said, his voice filled with pride. "And so do you. Enjoy tonight, okay?" As the evening progressed, a small group of conservative patrons seated at the back of the room began to grumble. Andre noticed their disapproving glances and overheard snippets of their complaints. "This place isn't what it used to be," one man muttered. "They're letting just anyone in now," another added, his tone dripping with disdain. Andre approached their table with a steady demeanor. "Good evening, gentlemen. Is there something I can help you with?" The older of the two looked up, his face lined with irritation. This used to be a respectable establishment. Now it's more like a community center. Andre's expression remained composed. Riverside Pearl is still a place of excellence, sir. But excellence isn't just about exclusivity. It's about bringing people together. The man scoffed. And what does that mean? Andre leaned slightly closer, his voice steady but firm. It means everyone deserves a chance to enjoy what we offer, not just a select few. If that's a problem for you, I'm happy to refund your bill. The man's face reddened, but he said nothing further. Andre straightened and walked away, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. The rest of the evening went off without a hitch. Families laughed, children played, and the staff worked seamlessly under Andre's guidance. The Carters stopped by before leaving, Nathaniel extending a hand. "You're doing something special here, Andre," Nathaniel said. Andre shook his hand firmly. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us." As the last guests filtered out and the lights dimmed, Andre stood in the center of the dining room, taking it all in. Riverside Pearl felt different now, not just a restaurant, but a symbol of change. For the first time in a long time, Andre allowed himself a small smile. He was making a difference, one step at a time. It was a quiet afternoon when Margaret Hensley knocked on the door of Riverside Pearl. The sound was soft, hesitant, so unlike the woman who had once commanded the restaurant with an iron will. Andre Sullivan looked up from the paperwork spread across his desk, his brow furrowing in surprise. "Come in," he called, his tone cautious. The door opened slowly, revealing Margaret. Gone was the polished facade, the sharp suits, and the air of authority. She looked older, more fragile, her shoulders hunched slightly as if the weight of the last few weeks had finally caught up with her. "Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Margaret," Andre replied, standing. "This is unexpected." She stepped into the office, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm sure it is, but I needed to speak with you. May I sit?" Andre gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Of course." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Margaret's gaze flicked to the window, where the faint hum of downtown Charleston could be heard. "I've had a lot of time to think," she began, her voice faltering, "since everything happened." Andre leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral but attentive. "And?" Margaret exhaled slowly, her hands twisting together. "I've spent years convincing myself that I was doing the right thing, that my way was the only way. But seeing everything fall apart, hearing what people really thought of me, it's been a wake-up call." Andre's eyes softened slightly, though his posture remained firm. "It's not easy to face the consequences of your actions." "No, it's not," Margaret admitted, her voice cracking. "I was wrong, Mr. Sullivan, about you, about the Carters, about so many things. I let my own biases and fears dictate how I treated people, and for that, I'm sorry." The room grew quiet again as Margaret's apology hung in the air. Andre studied her carefully, searching for signs of sincerity. "Do you mean that?" he asked finally. Margaret met his gaze, her eyes glistening. "Yes. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want to try to make amends. I just don't know where to start." Andre leaned forward, his voice steady but kind. "Acknowledging what you did is a start, but it's not enough. Change takes effort, and it's not just about apologizing, it's about doing better." Margaret nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "What can I do?" Andre paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you're serious about making a difference, start by listening. Go to the community you ignored for so long, volunteer your time, work with organizations that support equality and inclusion. Learn from the people you've wronged." Margaret looked uncertain. "Do you think they'll even want me there?" Andre's voice softened. "People can be surprisingly forgiving when they see genuine effort. But you have to mean it, Margaret. This isn't about clearing your conscience. It's about making a real impact." Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for hearing me out and for not slamming the door in my face." Andre rose as well, extending his hand. "It's not about slamming doors, it's about opening new ones. Good luck, Margaret. I hope you find what you're looking for." She hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she said again, before turning and walking out of the office. As the door closed behind her, Andre sat back down, letting out a slow breath. He wasn't sure if Margaret would follow through on her promise to change, but he felt a sense of peace in giving her the chance. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean moving forward, and in that small act, Andre felt another piece of the past begin to heal. The sun bathed Charleston in a warm glow as Andre stood in front of Riverside Pearl, watching as the staff prepared for the day ahead. The atmosphere inside the restaurant felt lighter, energized by a renewed sense of purpose. What was once a symbol of exclusion and elitism was now evolving into something far greater, a place where everyone could feel welcome. That morning, William Prescott held a press conference in the restaurant's main dining room. Journalists and community leaders gathered, their voices a low hum of curiosity as they awaited his address. William stood at the podium, flanked by Andre and several staff members, including Caleb and Diane. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his tone resolute, "today marks a new chapter for Riverside Pearl and for Prescott Hospitality Group. Recent events have brought to light flaws in our culture that we can no longer ignore. As a company, we pride ourselves on excellence, and true excellence means embracing diversity, fairness, and inclusion." He paused, scanning the room. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a new hiring policy across all our establishments. This policy will ensure equal opportunities for individuals of all backgrounds. Additionally, we are establishing mandatory training programs to foster a culture of respect and understanding." The room erupted in applause, but William wasn't finished. And none of this would have been possible without the courage of one man, Andre Sullivan. His determination and unwavering commitment to justice have inspired us all. "Andre, thank you." William stepped aside, motioning for Andre to take the podium. Andre hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, his heart pounding. He glanced at the faces in the crowd, Nathaniel and Zara Carter sitting near the front, Caleb and Diane standing nearby, and even his mother, Lucille, smiling proudly. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," Andre began, his voice steady. "This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every step. What happened here at Riverside Pearl wasn't just about one person or one place. It was about a system that too often turns a blind eye to injustice. But change is possible when we work together." He looked directly into the cameras, his words now aimed at everyone watching. "To anyone out there who feels like they don't belong, who feels like the odds are stacked against them, don't give up. Your voice matters, your fight matters, and together, we can create a world where everyone has a seat at the table." The crowd erupted into applause once again as Andre stepped back, overwhelmed but proud. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Andre stood outside Riverside Pearl. The sign above the door now gleamed with new meaning, reflecting a brighter future. Nathaniel and Zara approached, with Zara running ahead to hug Andre tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Andre," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "For what, kiddo?" Andre asked, smiling. "For making it better," Zara replied simply. Nathaniel extended a hand. "You didn't just change a restaurant, Andre. You changed lives." Andre shook his hand firmly, his voice filled with humility. "I didn't do it alone. It was all of us." As they walked away, Andre turned to face the restaurant one last time. His gaze lingered on the door, knowing that it no longer symbolized division, but unity. Stories like Andre's remind us of the power of resilience, compassion, and collective action. They show us that even in the face of injustice, change is possible when we come together. What are your thoughts on Andre's journey? Has this story inspired you or reminded you of something in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more meaningful, inspiring content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Together, let's continue to spread hope, equality, and understanding, one story at a time.